money markets now suggest there's a good chance the Reserve Bank will cut rates in February, which puts it right in the middle of the federal election campaign. If so, that's good news for the government, which has wanted to claim credit for rate cuts. But there's no doubt the economy continues to stumble along, barely above recessionary levels, and households have been in their own personal recession for almost 2 years now. To unpack all of this, I'm joined by the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor. Angus, always good to chat to you. I just want to first off go to that issue of the timing of the election. The rate cuts could be coming. Government comes out and says, this is all about us, the plan's working. You've got to counter that. How do you do that?
Well, the plan isn't working, Ross, because Anthony Albanese promised that people would be better off under Labor, and it'll take a lot more than a rate cut to make them better off under Labor. In fact, we already know that household disposable incomes are down over 8% since Labor came to power. That's the biggest drop in history. We haven't seen it before. Far bigger drop than any of our other developed country peers around the world, and it's been absolutely disastrous for Australian households. That is not something to crow about. The government seems to want to tell everybody that they're better off, but they're not, and a rate cut's not going to change that.
OK, so you hear from the ACTU at the moment saying we need a rate cut. We think there's more than full employment in Australia. Rates should be cut. Now, you obviously have been negotiating with the Treasurer about the composition and the rules around the Reserve Bank in the future. Has the Reserve Bank been right to focus both on inflation and on employment as it makes its interest rate settings? Is that the right move?
Well, can I be clear that the ACTU couldn't give a hang about inflation? Yet the Australian people care deeply about inflation. It's hurt them enormously. And prices aren't going down. Prices aren't going back. Michelle Bullock made this point. 16% higher, 18% for working families just since Labor's been in power, in fact, higher than that. And it's caused enormous pain for Australian families. Their real incomes, their real wages indeed, have gone backwards under Labor by a long way. And there's no pathway
But they
back.
have a job. That's important too. If they didn't have a job, if there's mass unemployment, Australia would be in recession officially, not just the households, but the country. And so therefore, as a result, the one thing that's got Australians through this time, this period, is that they've had jobs.
Well, I think it's, with all due respect, it's pretty rich to say Australians have got through easily over the last couple of years. They haven't. They've struggled. I see it every day on the ground. I mean, they are really struggling to make ends meet. The food banks are seeing more people than we've ever seen before. The number of people I run into who are really struggling to make ends meet. And a lot of people won't tell you how tough they're finding it until you really...
But you get my point here. So I'm going to the Reserve Bank and what it's done.
Yeah.
Now, if it had taken the traditional path,
Yep.
rates would have been much higher.
Yep.
We would have gone into recession, but the Treasurer didn't want to be the Treasurer who had a recession.
Well, we've had 7 quarters of household recession.
But not an official recession.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, immigration doesn't save you from a household disaster, which is what we've had. We've had 7 quarters where GDP per capita has gone backwards in this country. We've never seen that before, Ross. I mean, this is an economic disaster for the household.
So is that something a coalition government could turn around? Is that something you would fix?
Well, when you look at the fundamental problem we're facing right now, the supply side of our economy is broken. And it's why we are a long way from sustainably beating inflation in this country. And I think the Reserve Bank knows that. We are a long way from that. So Labor productivity fell 0.5% in the last quarter alone. It's a supply problem we've got. When we look at housing, when we look at energy, when we look at financial services, sector after sector after sector, childcare, aged care, the government stimulating demand again today without solving the supply problems. Our fundamental problems are...
It's not sexy. Trying to fix the supply side of anything is not sexy.
No, but it's how you deliver prosperity. And I reckon prosperity is pretty sexy, Ross. I think Australians want aspiration back. I think they want a pathway back to being able to own their home. I think they want a pathway to restoring their standard of living. You are not going to achieve that unless you solve the supply side problems. This government doesn't get that. It's just adding spending, badgering the Reserve Bank, and trying to get a short-term fix to get through an election.
Okay, so
none of that will solve the underlying problems we've got in our economy. None of that gives us a pathway back to prosperity.
Let's say you're the Treasurer, and it's now 6 months' time, it's May or something like that, you're delivering your first budget. The reality is you've got deficits for a decade, you've got rising debts for that period of time. To get it back, you've got to go back to basically Tony Abbott, Joe Hockey, that style of austerity budget.
It's not austerity.
You know how tough that is and how deeply politically unpopular that is.
It's not austerity, but it's back to basics, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that. And you can't have government spending growth of 9%. 9% a year, which is what Chris Richardson says we're going to be seeing this year, and 18% over 2 years. I mean, this is way too fast. Way too fast. You add in state governments and what they're doing. I mean, that kind of spending is out of control. It's making it harder for the Reserve Bank to solve the problem it's got to. It's replacing private sector jobs where people pay taxes and contribute to roads and hospitals and schools with public sector jobs where we don't see that benefit. So that is not the pathway back. Now, the pathway back is private sector-led, business-led. It is getting the supply side.
But you know the private sector, big business right now, they're leaving Australia. They're taking their capital and putting it in America. And now, if multinational companies, and there's a whole bunch of companies that don't have that choice, but if they can, there's vast amounts of capital, big assets that we need here in Australia are not being built.
No, absolutely right.
Because people can't make money.
Well, if you can't get an approval to build a mine, you don't build the mine. If you can't get an approval to build a house, you don't build the house. If you can't get the road that you need to support the building of a new series of houses, you don't build them.
If your energy price is twice as much here as it is in America,
you shift your manufacturing. I mean, we're seeing exactly that, Ross. I mean, if you're in the energy sector, right now, better to invest in gas in the US than in Australia. And
couple of quick ones for you. Number one, was the government right to put $80 million into Rex, the airline, to keep regional flights alive?
Well, there's litigation, as I understand it, proceeding on this, so I won't comment on the case itself. What I will say is the government clearly has questions to answer here.
Okay.
It clearly has questions to answer, and they should be answered. This is $80 million of taxpayers' money. Every dollar of taxpayers' money really matters at a time like this, and the government should explain why that money was spent in the right place.
Second one is that the Treasurer yesterday said he's going to come and talk to you about who is on the new Monetary Policy Board. And he says they've got a whole lot of people, list of names already. Has he had that chat with you yet or not? You know,
I love the fact that this Treasurer telegraphs a private consultation to the media before the private consultation. Are you worried he's going to... Well, to be honest, that's not how you start a private consultation. Now, having said that, we have always been concerned that his primary strategy here is to sack and stack the board to politicise the Reserve Bank. So the simple answer to this question is keep the current board. Very simple. We've said that all the way along. And in a private consultation, heads up to you, I will say the same thing because I've said it publicly many, many times.
Tell you what, Angus Taylor, I've got to leave it there, but many thanks for your time.
Good on you. Good to be with you.